agenda is set. Hello, everyone. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. Memories of Mubarak, how they linger. In Cairo, the military is back on street patrol, ready to arrest. Could Egypt be headed for an historic U-turn? That and more today. It's time to talk. Egypt as divided as ever. President Morsi bringing in the military to stop protesters who say the new constitution is a sham. Morsi says nothing will stop this weekend's referendum. Democracy Egyptian style today on the show. Well, they make many of the clothes we wear, and they do it every day by risking their lives and sometimes losing their lives. A garment factory turned into a death trap last month in Bangladesh. 100 people dead, and observers say there will be more disasters. Today we hear from a former factory worker about the perils of putting the shirts on our backs. And did you notice there were climate talks recently, and again, environmentalists are calling it a big failure. The Doha talks ended with the Kyoto Protocol extended, but on life support. Nothing really has changed in how we pollute or protect our planet. That could change in 2015. We've got a new deadline, or are we just kicking the can further down the road? Well, I've invited three people today to talk, argue, and pry apart these headlines. My first guest is responsible for helping the world's youngest climate ambassadors get out their message. She assisted a group of young people from numerous countries who wanted to travel to the Doha talks. I'm happy to welcome Nadine Butcher. She is with youthinkgreen.org. Nadine, it's good to see you on the show. Disappointment, unfortunately, is probably the biggest message that these young people brought home from Doha, isn't it?
Well, what else can you expect if people more focus on the national interest than on the international concerns?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is a big criticism of the talks. We're going to talk about balancing national interest with the environment in just a moment. My second guest says that the big brands in the clothing business turn a blind eye to what is really going on in the factories where clothes are made. But he knows the truth because he used to work in those factories. I'm happy to welcome to this show Hassan Ashraf. He is a PhD student now here in Germany. Hassan, you're an expert on the garment industry in Bangladesh. You say the people who make our clothes are working in sweatshops and then going home to live in slums.
They do, and one might assume that these factory conditions or workers' lives are something specific to Bangladesh. However, their lives and the factory practices are pretty much conditioned with how Western brands place their order.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about if consumers are willing to pay more in order for factory workers to have a better standard of living. That in just a moment. My next guest says that Egypt will not become a democracy as long as Mr. Morsi is in power. Some strong words there. I'm happy to welcome to the show Saeed Samir. He is an Egyptian journalist. He knows how things are on the ground there. Saeed, you say President Morsi's ideology is not compatible with Western democracy. Okay, that's one point. But President Morsi is the fairly elected president of Egypt. What kind of Egypt is he trying to create?
Actually, he had a very good chance, but the way things are going so far, it's more like chaos than any other thing else.
Yeah, chaos, and a lot of people are saying it reminds them of how things were under the reign of Hosni Mubarak. And in Cairo right now, reporters say that it feels and looks as if the revolution never happened. Tanks are rolling on the streets. Soldiers are patrolling with orders from the president to arrest protesters. President Morsi says this is what it takes to ensure stability in the country until a referendum on a new constitution is held this weekend. But opposition groups say Morsi has quickly revealed himself as another Mubarak, willing to trample all rights in order to maintain his power.
As night falls in Cairo, hundreds of protesters hit the streets to vent their anger. President Mohamed Morsi may have backtracked on a controversial decree granting him sweeping new powers. But his opponents say that's not enough. They want the referendum on Egypt's draft constitution to be scrapped.
Morsi is playing games with us and trying to buy time. But we're sticking to our position. We reject the referendum.
But Morsi and his supporters are determined to see the vote go ahead as planned. These soldiers are now in the front line of the political battle. Morsi has granted the Egyptian military the power to arrest civilians in the run-up to the referendum. The situation in Egypt looks set to escalate, with both sides planning mass protests over the coming days.
Saeed, what do you think is going to happen? Are we going to see this referendum take place this weekend?
What I expect, unfortunately, yes. What I hope is that Morsi would have kept his promises. It was very clear when people were asking him during the election phase as a candidate, he made a clear promise that he will establish a new committee to work on the new constitution, but he just didn't keep his promise.
And why do you think that is? I mean, what pressure is there forcing him to just keep Islamists on this committee?
I would say there are two main objectives for Morsi and his group.
The Muslim Brotherhood.
Of course. Morsi is just like the front player, but he is being controlled.
So he resigned from the Muslim Brotherhood when he became president, but you just think that was just window dressing?
Of course. At the beginning, many people tried to believe him, but how he acted afterwards, till very recently, it was clear that he is being controlled. Not even he is controlling the Muslim Brotherhood. His decisions are all made there. And the objectives of this new constitution and why he is insisting on keeping it the way it is and not even like delivering his promises are two things. First one, to gain the support of other Islamists out from the Muslim Brotherhood, because like you have Salafists, you have Jihadists, and he made some promises as well to those people. And those promises are related to applying Sharia codes, Islamic codes.
And so do you think he wants Sharia law to be enshrined in this constitution?
No, but he wants to make sure that he will be able to put something ambitious to play on both sides. Sharia law cannot be applied in Egypt. He knows it, and he will never do it. And if we wait after this process, I'm sure the unrest in the future will come from other Islamists outside the Muslim Brotherhood who are now supporting Morsi, believing he will apply Sharia. If you look, like last week, they had a big demo, the political Islam currents, different currents, and they were calling it demo for Sharia and expecting that they are rooting for Morsi because he will keep his promises and apply Sharia, but he will not.
But see, this is what I think the people outside the country don't understand. I mean, when he was elected, he said, "I am the president of all Egyptians." That means a constitution is going to have to establish a secular government. That's the only way everyone can be represented by the government. Why can't he stand on that and tell people such as the Salafists, that's the way it is. If you want to work in this country, you have to accept that. Why can't he use that language? He's the president.
Of course, but he will lose their support.
Yeah, but he's already elected, though, Saeed.
But it is not settled. His power, his political power in Egypt is not settled. Many people question the loyalty of army and security forces in Egypt. What you said in the introduction, that it is like a U-turn. No, it is not. In Mubarak had a very good grip on the power.
On the military.
On everything.
Yeah.
On security forces, people were loyal to him. It was highly corrupted and deeply corrupted, and he was using corruption as a tool to guarantee himself a very high level of loyalty. But in the case with Morsi, the situation is completely different. Opposition are very strong against Morsi. The loyalty of security forces and even army, military, they are questioned. And that's why his second objective for this ambitious constitution is the centralization of political power. which is completely against what he promised, and it's completely against what democracy stands for. So he is trying to make sure whatever happens in the future, we can interpret this ambitious constitution to come up with political power.
In other words, you're saying he wants to push through a constitution that is ambiguous enough to allow him to interpret it to serve his means. Is that what you're saying?
Muslim Brotherhood, not him personally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mohammed El-Baradei with the National Salvation Front has called the Constitution a sham. Now, this is a Nobel Prize winner. This is a man with tremendous respect in the international community. And he is coming out and saying, Mr. President, what you are doing here is a sham. The whole world is watching. There is tremendous pressure on Morsi to deliver what he promised when he was elected. Isn't that worth anything inside Egypt?
Not really. Why? First of all, I hate to disagree with you, but the political pressure from outside is not really, as you said, because international politics is not about what's wrong and what's right, what is democratic and what's not. It is all about the benefits of the decision makers. Like they sent one of their guys, the Muslim Brotherhood, El-Arian, to America just a few days ago. And what El-Arian was doing is just trying to ensure that America believes the Muslim Brotherhood. They will be taking care of the security of Israel from their side, and this is a major point. And I believe the American government doesn't have any problem if the Muslim Brotherhood would suppress the people a bit and will be less democratic as long as they play with the rules of America. And
well, I mean,
they have done it with Mubarak.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, we would have to ask Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama about that. But the fact that the United States and other Western governments are talking with the Muslim Brotherhood is a recognition of the democratic process in Egypt. That's something very valuable. And I would say that I can't believe Mr. Morsi would be so naive as to throw away that credibility that he has in his hand right now. I mean, I don't know. Let me open it up. I mean, what do you got, Hassan and Nadine, what do you think? Is Mr. Morsi just a dictator in democratic clothing? Don't all rush to answer. I know that's a tough question. It's an explosive question right now.
Yeah, it really is. Well, I actually believe it's difficult if you get pressure from one side to stay democratic, trying to actually unite the voices of your whole country. So I wouldn't say that he throws away something, but it's probably a very difficult situation that he finds himself in right now. So to make sure that he kind of acts the right way.
I mean, it's a difficult situation. What do you think, Hassan? I think it almost feels like this is a man who is kind of feeling his way, dealing with the fact that all of a sudden he has all of this power. And he gets to wield this power. It almost looks like an amateur who is rushing to become a professional.
I mean, it may seem like that, but the problem is way more deeper. I mean, it is the problem of, for example, democracy is something modern, pretty much Western, and this Sharia law, all the Salafists or the Islamists, I mean, they seem like traditional. So it is a kind of apparently contradiction between modernists and then the traditionalists or Islamists, which is actually not. It is partly, as you mentioned, that is broader power game. So President himself is at the center, and things seems like going beyond control in a way.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt him because I think your Islamic background is, I can feel it. Because this is, I say it myself, because I'm also Muslim, but I'm also secular. Even my Muslim colleagues, the Islamists, they say, how can you be secular and Muslim? They don't comprehend it. They say, if you are secular, you can't be religious, you can't be Muslim. And I think they both still have the truth. There are some big contradictions between Salafist and modern thinking and democracy. There are some Sharia codes can never be applied, even if we tell them, here you go, you have the country, do whatever you want, they won't be able to do it. Why? Because their ideology is based on some morals and value systems existed more than 1,000 years ago.
Exactly, but Saeed, how can you even talk about a government being secular when it's even letting the word Sharia law pass over the tongue of the president or the people who are in power? I mean, Sharia law and a secular society cannot coexist. You say that yourself.
And there is a trick. This trick has been going on since Mubarak and Sadat. Sadat used to call himself the believer President Sadat. And the trick here is using the wording, principles of Sharia. In the old constitution of Mubarak, Sharia law was mentioned on the constitution under the phrasing of principles of Sharia. And what are the principles of Sharia? They don't tell you. But if you think it is justice, it's freedom, equality, it has nothing to do exclusively to Sharia.
Are minorities in danger in a future with Morsi in power? I'm talking about Coptic Christians. I'm talking about secularists. Are they in danger?
They are in danger, and I had to tell you, even here in Germany, discussing some of my Islamist Egyptians living in I get very harsh threats.
Yeah.
You are secular, you are not Muslim anymore, and maybe you have to be careful.
And that's what in the West, that's what confuses a lot of people when they want to separate the religion from politics, and then they hear something like that from you, Saeed, and then that there are many Muslims who don't separate religion from government.
Here I would like to intervene. I mean, I have 2 points to mention on the same ground, to you and to you too. I mean, me being an anthropologist and religion as a cultural component, it is not really possible to be secular, being religious. And in West, religion is not deducted from politics at all. I mean, if religion is an indicator of being traditional, and the pretty modern West is also pretty much into religion, and in that sense, I mean, Western is never been modern.
But what I'm saying is an Egypt being created that will guarantee in the Constitution a protection for religious minorities, and that will guarantee that everyone can exercise their religion without fear of persecution. We have to wrap it up. We have to move on. But Saeed, let me ask you just very quickly for a prediction here. Is Morsi, is he going to stay in power? Does he have what it takes to stay in power?
Unfortunately, yes. But I believe it's not going to be hard. It has to be very harsh, and I'm afraid maybe so much blood must be shed before he is going to leave.
So you think the future is rather bloody for Egypt?
Unfortunately, yes.
All right, well, I'm sure we'll be talking about this again, unfortunately. We're going to move on to Asia now, where there are thousands of factories, many of them sweatshops, where the clothes and garments are made which end up on discount store racks right here in Europe and in the U.S. Last month, more than 100 people died in a fire in one of those factories in Bangladesh. Now, the tragedy has drawn attention again on the seemingly sinister seams of production in the clothing industry, and it begs the question, how far will retailers, suppliers, and consumers go to hold down prices at the expense of workers' safety?
The fire at the Tazreen fashion factory in Dhaka has drawn attention to the dire standards that garment industry workers have to endure in Bangladesh and the wider region. The clothing manufactured in Dhaka was destined for outlets in the West and was made under health and safety conditions that are unacceptable there. Yet many international fashion labels are lining up to have their clothing sourced in Bangladesh. They've done very little to address the issues of conditions in the sweatshops seriously. The appetite for cut-price clothing in the West appears to be insatiable. But surely it's time to stop and ask what the true cost of cheap fashion is.
So let me pick up with you. You actually worked in these factories, in these sweatshops. I mean, tell us, we don't usually hear from people who've actually worked there who then come to the West to talk about this. Tell me about your experience. What was it like?
The sweatshops. First of all, I would like to mention that I would like to talk about a misconception that these factories, these ready-made garment factories, known as Bangladeshi factory, but these are not Bangladeshi factories because all these Western brands, they are using this factory space and cheap labor to produce their apparel items. And all these around 5,000 factories are 100% export-oriented. And they are not at all allowed to sell a single item in the local market. And they only exist in connection with the Western brands. So these factories are economic enclaves of this global apparel production chain.
They're there for export, solely there for export.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
And most of the factory practices are pretty much tied to how work orders are placed, because the working days, factory management, how they should check the quality, these are all designed in the work order. And all these factories are very known to the Western brands because their representatives or their from head office, they visit these factories to check the quality to make sure the shipment is made online. So, shipment is made on time.
On time, all right.
Right.
Well, tell me a little bit, though, about when you were there. What was it like? Because we rarely get a view inside these factories.
So, many of my colleagues in that factory and in other factories, they told that this working in the factory, it feels like working in a prison. And it is pretty much controlled, and the work days are usually long, and the overtime are often forced upon, and many times workers also ask to do the overtime.
What is overtime? What are the working hours?
Working hours starts at 8 and lasts until 5 p.m. And after 5 p.m., the time is regarded as overtime, and there is no sharp boundary when night shift starts. And it is not like that shift in one shift, one bunch of workers are working, and then another batch replace them. It is the same workforce working for the day shift, working for the overtime, and working also for the night shift.
So you could have someone starting at 8 who works past 5 p.m., who works into the night.
Sometimes, and it depends on if the shipment deadline is nearer, then night shifts are often in practice.
And there's no pay, there's no overtime pay.
There are overtime pay.
There is overtime pay.
But overtime pay is related to the basic salary, and basic salary or the minimum wage is pretty low. So workers are compelled to do overtime, and at the same time, overtime is forced on them. So to make a living in Dhaka, they need to do the overtime. And at the same time, it is pretty much complementary, the minimum wage and the overtime.
And they earn, I think I was reading, what is it, about $37 a month is the annual wage for a factory worker in a place like Dhaka.
Yeah.
And I mean, help us here understand what the living costs are there. Is $37, is that enough to live on in a month?
Not at all.
Okay.
I mean, that is the minimum age. For overtime, workers also do get more money. But the total amount they get, on an average, it is not meeting their basic needs.
How much do they need, for example? Let's say a family of 4. How much would they need in a month just to stay above poverty?
At least around €100 a month.
Right. So even if both parents are working, they're not making enough money?
If both are working in the factory, and still it is not enough.
What about where they're living? Because you had said also that these are slums. I mean, you said you lived in a room that was 2 meters by 2 meters.
Right. These slums are not often established on legal lands, and these slums, which is why these slums are not provided with urban utilities, for example, electricity, gas, water supply. And security is also not so good. And sanitation is also not so good. So workers are forced to live in this certain kind of residential areas within Dhaka due to their low wage. And they also do not have much time often to cook food, and they cannot buy the good quality food either.
So it sounds like here that the workers, they're caught here. They're the victims in this. Who's responsible for improving the situations, for making these factories safe, for also ensuring that the working conditions are better? Is it the retailers, the big brands? Are they responsible? You know, they claim in their PR campaigns that they know what's going on, but are the Bangladeshis themselves, the political leaders, are they also responsible? Who is dropping the ball here?
Both, actually. So both means, for example, these Western brands and local political leaders and local factory owners. I mean, they are combining doing the business. They are benefiting each other. And then the factory conditions are often not disclosed to the consumers here. The consumers are often deceived by the advertisements.
Right, which is somewhat hard to believe. I don't think people are that naive. Nadine, what do you think? Do you think consumers should be demanding better working conditions, or is it too intoxicating? I mean, if you go shopping, certain stores, the prices are so low that you're happy to buy a shirt for €5 and go home and you don't think about it anymore.
True. I believe that, as you said, consumers shouldn't be so naive thinking like if they buy a shirt for €5 that the story behind the product that you actually see at the end in the shop is a good story. And I think that is like the biggest problem with the consumers, that they actually start thinking once they enter the supermarket or shop, whatever, just paying attention to the price and not seeing the story behind it. I mean, they want to just buy things for little money in order to have still money for other things, for leisure time and all that.
But isn't that that's what consumers all over the world want? I mean, I don't think Western consumers are any different than consumers would be in Egypt, right, no, Saeed? I mean,
don't think
they don't think that far when they go shopping, right?
Especially if they are Egyptians with a very low income, as it is in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
Their target is to survive, the majority of people, so naturally they will be looking forward to have the cheapest products. I have one comment about this whole issue, because I see a lot of thinking of it as slavery and very negative aspects, trying to boycott such products without thinking about what are the alternatives for those people. I believe those campaigns to stop such factories don't stop and ask themselves, what do the people work there like him did would say if we tell them you can decide?
Well, let's ask Hassan. I mean, Hassan knows.
As you work there, if there were some kind of vote and you can decide, let those guys get out here, we want it closed down, would you vote for this?
No, not at all. I mean, I also talked with some other newspapers and other televisions, and everywhere I said that boycott is not at all a solution, because it is just not the cheap brands. It's expensive brands, they are doing the same. And Bangladesh is now the second largest apparel supplier after China.
Yeah.
And all big brands, they are producing there. Most of them.
And I mean, I don't want to be the devil's advocate here, but we also have to admit that these factories, they may certainly not be the factories we would want, but they still provide an income that does allow these people to attempt to move up one leg on the ladder of the economy. Isn't that true? I mean,
no.
Is there an alternative for them?
Alternative is not the question. It is not a moving upward ladder at all. I mean, after working 5-6 years...
It's just existing.
After working 5-6 years, it is not physically possible to work for that long hours, 10 to 14 hours in a day.
That's why he's right, that when we talk about slavery in a way, I mean, that's what, at the end of the day, that's what they feel like.
If you are an activist and you are heading for an objective that the people you are rooting for don't like, I think the Western approach to boycotting and trying to close down those factories are not accepted by the people who are suffering, as he's saying. I think the better way of addressing this problem would be how to develop alternatives, because those people who are working there, their lives will be much worse.
I mean, I've got an example for you here. An independent inspection system has been suggested that would be run by safety professionals, people who would come in and look at the factories, see what's wrong, and say, hey, these things have to be improved. Now, the only companies that have signed up for this are Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, and the German retailer Chibo. No one else will sign up with it. Walmart will not, Metro will not, Carrefour will not. What is going to happen, and I'll ask you this, Hassan, you were there on the ground, what has to happen to make real improvements in these factories?
Tommy Hilfiger did not do that all of a sudden out of altruistic intentions. I mean, he was interviewed in 2010 after, in his factory, 29 workers were killed. And first he denied that, no, it was not my factory, we pulled out. And since it was filmed by ABC News channel, by Brian Ross, so then the Philip Van Heusen and Tommy Hilfiger himself, they came to the ABC News studio on the next day and apologized. And this is how it happened. And so
they have to be shamed into taking action?
Not necessarily.
But that means people have to die.
We need more, I mean, we cannot escape this neoliberal capitalism. We need more altruistic capitalists who just don't do business, but do business with some ethics. And that is, they are saying in their, if you go any of the websites, you can see that they are ensuring environmental consequences, they're protecting environment, and they're also care for their workers. But they're not doing it.
But you're saying we need more altruistic business people. So you're saying at the end of the day, it is up to the Western retailers to make the change.
Not necessarily. It takes both. I mean, Bangladesh government.
Yeah, where are the Bangladeshi politicians here?
And many of the Bangladeshi politicians who are member of parliament, they also have garment factories, big factories.
And so they are invested in the system as it is.
Yes.
All right. So they have no motivation to change things, do they? They're making lots of money.
They have. They have. But one thing I would like to say, that how one work order is being placed.
Yeah.
For example, one brand in Germany, I mean, in Europe, Germany is the biggest buyer of these, a producer in Bangladesh. So what they do, they place a work order. They do not pay in advance. And with this confirmed work order, the Bangladeshi producer showed that to a bank. Bank give them loan, and once the entire product is shipped here, and it is okayed, only then
is the money paid.
Money paid. So owners are pretty much under pressure too.
Right, of course.
And they just, this is trickle-down effect on the shop floor.
Okay. All right. Lots of things there. We have to move on. We're running out of time. But definitely a system here. Yeah, you're saying a lot of altruistic people need to come out of the woodwork. Yeah,
I mean,
a lot of
good words, but it takes both.
Yeah.
The industrial leaders, political leaders in Bangladesh, their commitment, and the brand's commitment, because they're the biggest player. And many brands are even powerful than many politicians.
That's true. That's true. All right, we need to move on here. It is difficult to find a positive spin on the outcome of the Doha climate talks, which just ended, and understandably so. The Kyoto Protocol, the only binding global agreement to reduce greenhouse emissions, was extended to the year 2020, but Russia, Canada, and Japan, they decided to drop out. And the $100 billion that developed countries once promised to help poor countries adapt and fight climate change, well, that money is suddenly not available. Poor countries will have to make do with a lot less. And by the way, the climate, it will continue to change.
The Doha climate talks ended with a last-minute agreement. The Kyoto Protocol on cutting fossil fuel emissions, which would have expired next year, was extended. And a roadmap for negotiations on a new global climate treaty that would go into legal force in 2020 was agreed. But there was no unity on deeper cuts in emissions. Critics say the outcome was woefully weak and that major players were more interested in protecting special interests than protecting the environment. But is it that simple? Is Doha a weak compromise or another significant step in the right direction?
Nadine, you're just back from Doha, so was it that way? Was it one big failure?
Well, at least they committed on the extension of the Kyoto Protocol. At least there was one outcome.
I mean, but
But
come on.
to be honest, I think like most delegates didn't do their homework or the preparations properly. And especially, what can you expect if they are actually more interested or actually wear like their national glasses and not seeing the international problems if they just think about their own country's benefit or the restrictions that they might have for them?
But that's what we heard after Copenhagen, for example.
Exactly.
So you're saying basically nothing has changed.
Yeah, one could say so. I think that actually to bring so many countries together to one table is not the right way. Especially, as I said, if they just see their national concerns. What we as the youth movement from Youth in Green actually demanded before was like having maybe 3 to 5 representatives from Europe that work before, that find a common agreement, not negotiating, more like arrange with each other, and then representing a whole region, not just one country. And I think this way of having roundtables with less delegates would bring such kind of conferences very much forward.
That sounds good, but haven't we been doing that anyway? I mean, for example, the European Union goes to these talks many times with a unified front. But that still doesn't get China's attention. It doesn't make the United States act. It doesn't make Brazil come on board. So there has to be something else there that gets people to act.
I don't even think that the European Union actually was like, or came there was one voice. I mean, we saw Polonia that was kind of blocking the blocking the negotiations.
Okay.
I mean, before they were talking about increasing the 20% aim to 30, but what was actually the outcome when they were unified at the conference? I mean, they didn't speak with one voice. They still had the international interests, the national interests. I'm sorry.
And I mean, so it sounds like a broken record. And what do you tell the young people who? I mean, I really, you know, I feel for you. You've got these young people there with you who believe that change can come, and then they go to these talks and see what happens, and at the end there's nothing to show for it. I mean, that has to be incredibly discouraging for these young people.
It definitely was, but I mean, they also prepared themselves. They had a look at the previous conferences, and they knew what they actually had to expect, that it would not be like a milestone all of a sudden. But as I said, they believe that it's definitely not the right way to approach things, to just stand for. I mean, there was one boy, for example, that we had from Egypt along, and he said, well, I cannot just go there to a conference saying I'm an Egyptian or I'm a German. I actually have to unite different nationalities in my body. Like, part of my body is like American because I want these human rights to also be valued for other societies. Or part of my body is a European because I really want them to make a pledge to be ambitious. So it's not just being about one nationality. They try to...
They're thinking like they're citizens of the world. But then we get back to what we were just talking about with Hassan, and you've got competing economies here. And isn't, at the end of the day, isn't that the problem? Economies are trying they're competing, one's trying to win over the other. And as long as that is the case, no one is going to give more than an inch. I mean, I'm trying to figure out if there is a way, even intellectually, to find a way to get countries that are so different economically to get on the same page here. How can I get Bangladesh to get on the same page with Canada, with the United States, with Brazil?
But they're not on the same page, actually. I mean, especially in this issue of environment, even as she said, the people were attending were thinking much more locally or nationally than international. But if you look at the agreements and how it proceeds, they don't have to be actually on the same page. I think the major problem in these 3 issues is that you have some powerful players misusing their power to exploit the playground. And unfortunately, in some countries like Germany or the US, such principles of democracy and justice and equality and fairness, they are working pretty good. They are not perfect, of course, but to a level that is quite good for the well-being of the citizens. Mm-hmm. But the same governments who are running those countries, when they are dealing with international issues Like America, for example, with their so big mouth about democracy and the well-being of the world, they are not doing very good in the issue of environment. They are not really, and they cannot really excuse themselves. They are a major political player in this globe. But they don't.
Well, see, that's the point. I mean, I don't want to single out the United States here. The United States certainly has been a huge hurdle to development, but they're not alone. And the leaders from these countries, when they go to these talks, not only are they there to bring a unified front for the world, but they're also representing the economic interests of their country. And the question is, how do you bridge that? And I keep thinking of what Hassan said, we need more altruistic people. And I'm wondering, where are they going to come from? I mean, does heaven have to open up and drop some angels down on us? Where?
I mean, we need to enforce laws. We have to create more laws and enforce laws to make people altruistic. I mean, the factory fire, these 111 workers were killed and many more missing and not enlisted. I mean, this factory was certified as compliance factory, which was not. It did not have any external fire exit.
Yeah.
The factory itself became a death trap and workers had to kill. They had to jump from 5th floor on the ground and died.
Yeah.
So if this factory was following the law, then this accident might happen, but this is not accident. This is a kind of like negligence.
Wait, I have to give Nadine here the last word. I'm being told we're running out of time. You get the last word, Nadine, briefly.
Well, I just think it's not just about law, it's also about education. I mean, we cannot just put people onto like a political course if they do not really carry the will of becoming altruistic.
You hear the music, Nadine. I'm going to have to cut you short. Education, altruism, and of course, injustice, and a good dose here of what Saeed said. All right, that's going to round out the agenda this week. Don't forget you can watch the show again online. You see the address, and don't be shy. Tell us what you think about the show. Our inbox is always open. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. Thanks for stopping by, and join me again next time when I set the agenda.